We've all asked ourselves at least once, what is the meaning of life? What significance does everything that I know have? But what a lot of people don't consider is that everything has an origin. Every conceivable thing that you can see, touch, taste, feel, sense, and hear has a point from which it originates. Even things that are intangible like your conscience, love, and even meaning all have a point of origin. You can give yourself subjective meaning by saying, oh yeah, I love these people or this person, so that gives me meaning because I'm going to love them every single day. Or perhaps you're just living for money. Oh well, money gives you meaning. That's a subjective sense of meaning. But is there an objective sense of meaning? See, meaning can come from a subjective origin, but the catch is that anything temporary cannot give you true meaning. But living for anything physical in the world is futile because everything that is material and confined to space and time will deteriorate over time, and eventually it will expire or die. And this is what I find extremely interesting about our search for meaning on this earth. See, if the source of our true meaning is anything, it would have to be something that is immaterial, eternal, and not limited by the confines of space and time. And there's only one thing that I can think of that could be that thing, and it either exists or it doesn't. And that thing, that being, is God. Now, we all have our different opinions about God. Christians believe one thing, Jews believe another, Muslims believe another thing, atheists think God doesn't exist. The problem is that without an eternal, limitless God that exists outside of our known reality, life has no meaning. Because if there's no God, everything is material, everything is physical. And as we discussed earlier, everything material eventually deteriorates. So living for any one thing that you can name or feel or see in front of you is futile because eventually everything will die. However, if there's an eternal being called God that created everything, our meaning stems from him because without him we would be nothing. This brings me to a Bible verse, 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love. God is the one who created us, and therefore he gives us our purpose and our significance. The point of origin where our true meaning comes from is God. And if we live for God, we live for love. Life can't have a meaning unless there's something outside of it giving it meaning. And if it's met with the confines of the physical world and it can't break out of them, that means that it doesn't have true meaning. Living for money runs the risk that you will go bankrupt, that you won't make the amount of money that you want to make. And then what are you living for? Living for that person or those people that you love will eventually run the risk of them passing away, of you losing them, of them turning their backs on you. What are you living for then? See, no matter what you name that you're living for, unless it is eternal and it will never deteriorate, you're not really living for anything truly meaningful. Now, of course, these things are meaningful in our lives. We need money. We need people to love and who love us. However, making that the purpose and central meaning of your life is actually a really bad idea. And if there's no God, nothing truly really has meaning, because everything that's giving you meaning and you yourself will eventually deteriorate and die. Everything will meet its end, besides if there's an eternal being that exists outside of the universe. Life cannot go from meaningful to not meaningful. If you and what you were living for both expire, were you really living for anything? Your life cannot go from meaningful to not meaningful. It doesn't make any sense. And it can't be meaningful then, but not meaningful now. That just means that it was never meaningful. Lucky for you, God wants to find you so you can discover the true meaning of life, which is to live for God, which means to live for love. God is the center point from which life's meaning originates. No matter what you appoint as your own personal God, we all have something at the center of our life, like I talked about earlier. But say that thing was to disappear, you'd think your life lost all meaning. Even if this thing only disappears after you die, people will still look back and say, man, he really wasn't living for much because it disappeared when he died anyways. Sure, it might have given you a feeling of purpose, a sense of meaning while you were alive, but if that thing doesn't last forever, what's the point? And this goes in deeper in the book of Ecclesiastes. That's a great read and I recommend you read it. However, the main point of Ecclesiastes is that really nothing matters, ... unless God exists. Then everything matters. What does that tell you? It tells you that God gives everything meaning. Nothing matters, ... without God. Let's just assume some crazy hypothetical case that God just ceased to exist. Me as a Christian, my life is now meaningless. What I was living for ceased to exist. Now, God will never cease to exist, but my point still stands. If God were a temporary thing, I wouldn't really be living for anything because I run the risk of it disappearing. But because God is eternal, I'm no longer running that risk. I'm living for something that is eternal and therefore meaningful. And nothing is eternal besides God. If there is no God, life has no meaning. Literally nothing in the observable universe is permanent. Not a single thing. Even the universe will eventually cease to exist, purely based on science alone. And this may make a lot of you feel hopeless or disappointed, or maybe you'll reel back in fear and try to deny that life doesn't have any meaning if there's no God. We can give ourselves meaning, some people might say. Not only is this false because we all die and everything physical expires, it also points out that us human beings are born with a desire for the immaterial, for love, for purpose, and we're always seeking after it. Which may suggest that because it's so intrinsic in our hearts and in our minds, and we have a conscience that actively looks for it, it may suggest that it exists. And we instinctually know it exists because we are intelligent beings that can think, and we're made in the image of God. As Christians, we know the meaning of life. Love people, love God, bring love to people to bring people to love. I'll say that again. Bring love to people to bring people to love. Show Christ to people to bring them to God. As Christians, if we're convinced we know the meaning of life, then why are we not sharing it with everybody that we know? Especially when there are legitimate consequences for rejecting God. Love is something immaterial, just like God, which makes sense. They both have the same intrinsic traits. Love exists immaterially and endures forever because God is love. And another point, people might say love is a chemical reaction, but no, the love of God, agape love, selfless, unconditional love that goes against our feelings, that goes against what we want, to even show somebody love even after they wrong us, even after they show that they don't like us. This kind of love is immaterial. It lasts forever. If living for this kind of love gives our lives genuine meaning, that must mean that this kind of love is not chemical, it's immaterial, and it's eternal, pointing to God. We can tell easily that Jesus love, godly love, agape love, selfless, unconditional love is not of our flesh. It's impossible in our humanity to show love to people that reject us, to show love to people that wrong us, to show love to people that hate us. It's incredibly difficult, and you're fighting against your flesh in order to do that. You must feed the spirit in order to do that. In other words, how does it serve you to be self-sacrificing for others, to have others gain because you lose? It is the nature of all living things to be self-serving, to be self-preserving, but we can choose not to be because we're able to love. It's almost like we naturally know right from wrong, but morals are immaterial. So how can we know unless we acknowledge that the immaterial exists? And if the immaterial exists, then the existence of a God is not that far-fetched at all. We would never feel guilt as people if morals did not exist. How would we feel that emotion if we weren't convicted of immaterial morals? What I'm trying to tell you is that it's impossible to live out a life genuinely and being intellectually consistent with denying that the immaterial exists. A life lived in denial of the immaterial is a life that is meaningless and without morals, which means you can do anything without consequence because nothing matters. And no one can live that way. As human beings, we're not able to live that way. We are always saying, oh, he's wrong for doing that. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I need to do this right now. I need to pursue this goal right now. Why? If nothing matters, why aren't you doing everything you can to serve yourself and not care about other people? Why are you not sacrificing the needs of others to serve only yourself? Why do you think that this thing is so important when in reality, it doesn't matter because we all die? It's impossible to live out a life as hopeless as that. Everybody subconsciously acknowledges the immaterial: purpose, love, conscience, and morals. It's impossible to live without those things. The only way that something can generate meaning in our life is if it's eternal and immaterial. Otherwise, it would deteriorate and our lives would have never had meaning in the first place. And without God, we wouldn't have life, therefore making him the genesis of our meaning and our purpose. And if the immaterial can exist, then of course a God can exist. So I leave you with this. Live out your faith. If you genuinely believe in it and you believe you know the meaning of life, share it with everybody that you know. Bring love to people in order to bring people to love. Love does not come from us. It comes from above. Unconditional love does not serve us. It is not self-serving. It serves our higher purpose, which is to walk with God and bring people to God. That is why we do it. Thanks for watching. Follow the call to Christ. Defend the faith. Share the gospel. God bless you.